Welcome to Lair, the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. And on today's episode, I have a very special guest, Martin Popoff. He's back here at the Lair, author and journalist. And Martin has a brand new book. I mean, this is hot off the presses. The ink is still wet on this book. But I saw it. I got excited. I love AC/DC. I had to talk about it. And so Martin is here. We're here to talk about his new book, AC/DC at 50. Martin, thank you for joining me here again at the Lair. It's been a little while, but it's always great to have you here.
Always fun. Yeah.
I had the pleasure of visiting Toronto with my family not too long ago, and Martin was kind enough to take time out of his super busy schedule to meet us for lunch and then to show me around town. And I can confirm to everybody out there that Martin is just as charming in person, maybe even more in person than he is on when we see him here on YouTube and in the videos. So, all right, Martin. So thanks for being here at the Lair. Tell us about the new book, AC/DC at 50.
Yeah, so I just got it yesterday. So here's what it looks like. Big hardcover. It's got a dust jacket on it. This is kind of cool. I just noticed this after I got them a bit, but it's a little blind embossed, like Back in Black, when you take the dust jacket off there.
Nice.
So it's essentially let me put the dust jacket back on. It's essentially a book of, let's see if we can do, oh, there's got the one fold out page. Maybe I won't be able to hold it. Well, let's just do a quick flip like that. So it's essentially a book of 50 AC/DC highlights. This is a concept that the publisher has, Motor Books Quarto. It's a follow-up on my Bowie at 75, and I've got another one coming down the pipes as well. But so the task was to come up with a list of 50 career highlights, tell the story of AC/DC through 50, important things that happened to them. So it's all just partitioned off that way. But yeah, just a big coffee table book, a lot of analysis of the band's history.
Awesome. Looks awesome. Yeah, I did have a chance. Martin sent me a thing that I could look at some parts of the book in the foot. Just the quick that I scrolled through it. I love the layout. I always like when the pictures are sort of interspersed as you're reading along. I never liked it when it's just like, the middle of the book, you got a whole bunch of pictures. So here, as you're reading the story, you're seeing pictures that are relevant to that time period. And just me looking at it really quickly and I'm a huge AC/DC fan. I'm one of those people, thought I've seen everything, but I already saw a couple pictures that I've never seen before. So
yeah, they do an amazing job, that publisher. I mean, they're the most beautiful plush books. My Pink Floyd just came out, which is out of stock. Don't order it from me. I won't have any till May, but the Pink Floyd is sold out, but that came in a slipcover and everything. But yeah, Dennis over there does an amazing job of the photo acquisition. It's always like really thoughtful what's there, and there's usually some good rare stuff that nobody's seen. So
all right. And I'm going to, of course, leave a link in the description down below for Martin's website where you can order the book. I'll say I order lots of stuff from Martin, and the postage and the price is always very, very reasonable. He does great on postage, even with, these bigger size books. And you definitely want to get on this, because I have a feeling that this one is going to be a hot seller. And if you don't get on this one right away, I have a feeling this one's going to sell out really quick, because this looks really awesome. All right, Martin. So let's just talk a little AC/DC here. Take us back. When did you discover AC/DC? What was your first AC/DC album? Where were you in your metal world when AC/DC came onto your radar? What did you and your buddies think of them when you first heard them?
Yeah. I definitely remember this. So the first time I ever saw an AC/DC album, we were on one of our family vacations across the country from Trail, BC. So we were in Winnipeg, in a Kelly's in Winnipeg, and I can still picture it now, just picking up Let There Be Rock. So it was 77. I think it was a 77 summer trip. So I remember picking up Let There Be Rock out of the rack, looking at it. And, already, so I was 14 years old, and already like there's some red flags a little bit. It's like, this looks kind of heavy, but not super heavy. They're not really rocking out on this cover. There's this weird little kid in the band. You know, the singer's just standing there, looks like he's having a nap or thinking about his taxes or something, right? And you flip it over, and there's that little kid again, and it's like, okay, well, that looks kind of weird. And it's like, why one guy? And the logo's kind of like old school looking, but it sounds kind of heavy. The song titles are a little bit old boogie woogie song titles, you know. So I don't know what this is going to be like, right? So bought it. And this is the part I don't remember, but I think at the same time I bought our North American version of High Voltage, right? So I think I bought both of them. And then what happens is you just progress across the country for days and days on end, and it just sits there in the Dodge camper van. And you go, and we went all the way across to, I think, actually, no, that trip was the one where we went to the States. So we went to New York City in the camper van on
Wow.
in 1977, right? And we're
From
staying at
BC.
Howard
That's a
Johnson's.
long ride from
Yeah,
BC.
and it's a shock, you know. You're from a small town, and this is the family vacation, and you're driving right into the belly of the beast, you know. New York City when it's going bankrupt, right? It's Helltown, right? 77, right? But yeah, so you go across, and then you eventually get home, and that's the first time you get to hear these new records. And so if High Voltage was in there, it definitely was always the weak tea sort of album for a while. But Let There Be Rock, I remember me and my buddies, it was a milestone album because it was the first album ever that was heavy from start to finish, that had no ballads. So it had no lousies. We had this whole weird rating system thing that everything could be rated a 6 out of 8, a 7 out of 9. You know, average songs cancel out, so they don't. So you could have a 3 out of 5 with 9 songs on it, and you just get on the phone, and everybody knew exactly what you're talking about, right? But this was I believe the contention with this album. How many songs are on Let There Be Rock? Is it 9 or 8? All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's say it's 8.
Yeah.
So the contention with that album was it was either an 8 out of 8 or a 7 out of 7 because Problem Child was a little poppy. So we had buddies who thought Problem Child was a lousy good, which means it still counts, or it was a so-so, which means it doesn't count. So that album was either an 8 out of 8 or a 7 out of 7. It's pretty funny.
Eight songs.
Eight songs. So it was the first album ever with no. And so here, let's get right into the weeds here. So we came up with this term, right? A perfect album is when every song is a good. So it's either a lousy good, average good, or a really good. But if you have a so-so, it's an imperfect album. Perfect album, right? So if this was a 7 out of 7, it was an perfect album. It was an 8 out of 8. And then the next album that came along that was like this was the Sex Pistols album. And then I believe and Rainbow Rising fit in there as well. So yeah, that's right. So this was like I think this was the second. I mean, it depended on how you rated Run with the Wolf as well, right? and then the next time this happened with an imperfect was the Motorhead's first album, and then the next time this happened with Perfects were the second and third Motorhead albums. So those were all the first albums that were heavy all the way through. And so that was my first AC/DC album. And I remember also, you know, I remember getting Powerage and getting that downtown on a hot sweltering day and strapping it to the back of my bike and having to ride home 3 miles with it, hoping it wouldn't warp. I remember Back in Black. I was already working in a stereo and record store, you know, underage, right? Well, no, I guess I would have been, I would have been late high school at that point. So 80, I would have been 17. So I wasn't underage. But that was a stereo demonstration album for us, right? We'd go into the basement Lair and these frickin' $20,000 stereos that people who worked up at the mill, Kaminko, would come in and blow that much money on a stereo, right? Sometimes, right? Like huge money. It's like the stereo is the most important thing in your life, right? You know, $5,000 JBLs and Serwin Vegas and Bose 901s and all this stuff, right? And that was one of our demonstration albums. You know, we would love when we'd get to go demonstrate this massive stereo and drop it on Hell's Bells or whatever, and just stand back and like, whoa, yeah. And then
nice.
the wallet opens and this massive stereo, right? It's like so cool. So yeah, so those are my first experiences with this. Highway to Hell as well was one of these where I remember getting on the phone with my buddy Forrest too, and switching the sides. I think I switched the sides and gave him the lousy side first, and then gave him the good side. So I go, okay, we're ready for this, Forrest. Here's how this goes. Highway to Hell's an average good. Then it goes really good, really good, really good, really good. Like it was just, that's my favorite side of AC/DC, right? So heavy, right? So yeah, those are the first early experiences.
It's funny when you're younger, you got to have everything sort of charted out, and these things are very important, where all these albums land, where these songs land, how you feel about it. You got to be able to defend your point to your buddies. It's like when you're 14 years old, this is like how your world sort of operates, this hierarchical, how you rank these albums and
and then funny also on the defending thing, it's like that guy bought that Black Sabbath album, so he's got to defend that one. And that guy, he's the Sabotage guy, and he's the guy who got Volume 4 first, right? And it's like, okay, now you're wedded to those albums. Those are the ones you have to like always say, no, man, it's the best one, man. Volume 4 is the best one because you're the one who owns it, right?
Yeah. And so my first album was Back in Black, and it was because I saw a video of You Shook Me All Night Long. I was exposed to rock before that. I tell the story a million times on my channel. I had an uncle that was only 10 years older than me, and he was into Kiss and Ted Nugent. So I was exposed to that. But when I saw AC/DC, I immediately forgot about Kiss. I just heard, it just immediately rang with me. It was my band. When I was in high school, my freshman year of high school, my friend had a brother who was a senior, and for the talent show, we got up and did an air band to Problem Child. And I dressed up as Angus and got on my friend's brother's shoulders. We went out into the kids and everything. And since his brother was a senior, everybody loved it. We had it all covered. We were freshmen. He was a senior. We got the whole school. Till this day, I will run into people that I went to school with that I'm the Angus Young AC/DC kid. Amazing. Even the first time I met my wife, her first, she was older than me. Her first response, weren't you the person that, dressed up like Angus Young? And
yes, that is so cool. Yeah. So I'll add one more thing about the early days thing. AC/DC were never, everybody else's best songs were always better than AC/DC's best songs. I mean, because we were raving metalheads, right? So, I mean, obviously, everything by Rainbow, Sabbath, Priest, UFO, and any of their heaviest songs were always heavier than all of AC/DC's. AC/DC just existed in this 7.5 out of 10 range with every single song kind of thing.
Yeah. What about seeing them live? Did you ever see them with Bon?
No, never saw them with Bon. Being from a small town, far from any big towns, didn't see a lot of concerts, and only saw them kind of later. Don't have a lot of memories of seeing. Well, okay, so my fondest memory of this whole being a rock scribbler, working for Tim Henderson and Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles and doing these books and interviewing guys. My favorite experience ever is an AC/DC experience because I got to see them play SARS Stock, right? The Toronto Rocks thing, where it was, Guess Who and Tea Party and Rush, like the only festival bill apparently that Rush has ever been on, right? And then after, I guess Rush was third from the top, and then AC/DC goes on. Yes, 400,000 people, right?
Wow.
And outdoors, obviously. And then AC/DC goes on, and it was just a hot, sweltering day, and the sun's going down, and the lights are coming up. It was the perfect time. I think they started with Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, which is kind of an obscure track. And then Stones closed it, right? And then Angus went up, and the Stones. But the cool thing is the next day, So my fond memory is the next day I got to go to the hotel and interview Malcolm. So there's my original Let There Be Rock with Malcolm on it.
Nice.
And then I got the other just Angus and Brian to sign as well. So I got I got 5 or 6 things signed by 3 guys, and that was really cool. You know, and that's my fondest memory of, you know, interviewing Malcolm in person in a nice hotel room, you know, just sitting down with him. That was really cool. So yeah, that was, but you know, I couldn't enjoy the concert really because I'm so stressed about the next day, right? It's crazy next day. Oh my God, I'm going downtown, you know, and interview Malcolm in person, right? So yeah, so that was cool. Other than that, come to think of it, that might have been the first time I ever saw them. And then they came back and did this strange concert where it just seemed like a weird time and it wasn't a great show and the sound wasn't great, but they went back to the same place, the Downsview ex-military base, and did another outdoor show and just AC/DC. Just some weeknight, and I don't even know if the season was that good, but 40,000 people came out for it. You know, that's quite a big crowd, right, for an outdoor show, but it's a weird size crowd. How many concerts have you ever thought of in your mind that had 40,000 people? It's a strange number,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, it was a big crowd, big outdoor crowd, but how big at 40? You know, could it have been bigger? You know, it could have fit more. So that was the limit, right? Of what they could sell. So they you know, they came to town, they didn't get 70, they got 40, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny. It was almost like a test of how many AC/DC tickets can you sell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they're one of those bands that, you know, when you really think about it, how many hard rock, heavy metal bands are there that can go anywhere in the world, anywhere, sell out whatever the biggest space you can provide for them and sell it out as many days in a row as they want? I mean, they are pretty much, you know, there's bands that have pockets where they're super popular in Europe or they're super popular in North America, but AC/DC is just one of those like universal bands that can just play anywhere to any size crowd. It's really hard to believe that you mentioned the Rolling Stones, like, you know, in my mind, growing up, discovering them in the 80s, you have this reverence for the Rolling Stones and bands like that. And you sort of think that they're in just a different category than like AC/DC, but they're really not. When you sit down with like record sales and things like that, I mean, AC/DC is right up there with, you know, the biggest of the big. Back in Black is, you know, I think it's in like the diamond category at this point, isn't it? Or at least close to it. You know,
it's well beyond. It might be double diamond. I can't.
Yeah, it's like in that rare, like, you know, it's up there with like
20.
the Eagles' greatest hits and Michael Jackson's Thriller as like, you know, one of the biggest selling albums of all time. And they're one of these bands that just, you know, this could be a topic of a video of songs or bands that have become like part of the conscious of society, whether they realize it or not. Like, you can't go to a hockey game without hearing Thunderstruck being played, or, you know, an ACD. You hear them at football games, you hear them in TV commercials. They're just like weaved into the fabric of our like the song Happy Birthday, or you know, these type of thing. It's like they're so massive and they're so big. Sometimes it's hard to even wrap your head around that, because even more so for you discovered them with Let There Be Rock. I discovered them with Back in Black, where they were still sort of these, you know, outcast parents didn't like them, and the, you know, all that kind of stuff. Well, they've turned into this entity that is just, you know, they're just huge now. And in a lot of ways, they've almost become like the ambassadors, the representatives for good old fashioned rock and roll, you know, just sort of that pure rock and roll spirit. You know, I think that they just really embody that, and they've taken this and just conquered the world with rock and roll, you know, straight up rock and roll, no frills, no gimmicks. I mean, Angus's outfit maybe, but for the most part, it's no frills, rock and roll.
Well, you know, it's an interesting concept when you think of, I think of 2 bands together that fit this concept, similar to what you're saying, but maybe just move the needle a little bit. AC/DC and Metallica. So
yeah,
it's almost like they are the 2 heavy bands allowed to be into the lives of the normies in a way. It's like, if you're going to walk on the wild side, it's AC/DC and it's Metallica. And you know, on a very isolated level, it's Blitzkrieg Bop, an Ace of Spades, right? It's just a tiny, tiny bit of metal that is allowed to like be part of absolute public consciousness. And it's even more remarkable that Metallica can be mainstream at all, because it's pretty extreme music, right? But AC/DC is a funny case where, you know, it's got both vocalists. You've got kind of, you know, that Banger Films Metal Evolution definition of extreme vocals, right? This is something I learned along the way as well. It's like, why did I ever think Creedence Clearwater Revival was heavy, right? It's because the extreme vocals, right? Or even Steppenwolf, right? It's, you know, there's music out there that's not very extreme, but you put a bit of a vocal fry vocalist on it, a guy screaming his head off occasionally, right? And that makes it sound more extreme. So you've got AC/DC's got that, but it's also distorted guitar all the time too, right? So yeah, it's kind of funny. But beyond that, the tempos are not a big deal. And in fact, sometimes there's no tempo almost, right? For those about to rock and thunderstruck, you know, sometimes Dirty Deeds, sometimes almost nothing's happening. And that helps people out too. That's, you know, I'm doing interviews for my Pink Floyd book, and that's a kind of a conversation I get into about Dark Side of the Moon, right? It's a Dark Side of the Moon 50th anniversary book. It's like, why was this so successful? It demands nothing of you. There's no action on the album. It's almost like the most laid back, boring in a way playing that you can possibly imagine. And even the lyrics are they're emotional and really deep lyrics in a certain way, but it's all a series of boring words, right? It's not $100 words. So it's like both AC/DC and Dark Side of the Moon kind of demand nothing of you, and that's why they're accessible enough that that's why they can appeal to so many people, right?
And even in you know, where I mentioned that, you know, my uncle who was into Kiss, and I liked Kiss and everything, but then I distinctly remember seeing I heard Back in Black, but the first image I saw of AC/DC was the Highway to Hell album cover. And I saw Malcolm Young on that cover, and I just immediately forgot about Gene Simmons. And that just seemed silly and goofy to me. You know, I saw them and it looked so like, wow, man, these are guys that you don't want to mess with, these guys in a dark alley, you know, type of thing. And it just, Malcolm there with that tight t-shirt, just the straight hair. It looks so like, man, this guy could be the dude fixing my car, you know, my mechanic or something. It looks so real. It looks so street. It looks so honest and no frills. And I say this all the time about Bon. He's one of those rare singers that when he sings about something, it never sounds like he's making it up, like it's a fantasy, right? When Bon says, if you're looking for trouble, I'm the man to see, you believe him. You know, when he tells these stories about you know, women and rock and roll, these aren't fantasies. You know, it's like he's telling you these are real life stories, and you absolutely believe these guys. I've never had a chance to come anywhere near these guys. The closest I ever came was working in a studio where the engineer was a roadie on the Highway to Hell tour, and one of his jobs was to sit with Bon in his trailer and walk him to his entrance on the side of the stage. And I remember him telling stories like, you know, Bon was the real deal. You know, he was like, he would go out drinking with the road crew, with the band, you know, with the fans. I mean, there was just and I just love it. You know, AC/DC, they just have this down to earth. They're for real. They're the people's band, you know, even though now they're these, you know, mega stars. You never see AC/DC on the red carpet. You don't hear tabloid AC/DC stories. You know, these guys, they just keep it real. You know, it's about the rock and roll. And I think that's what, getting back to what you were just saying about this sort of simplicity, you know, Dark Side of the Moon, it's easy. And it's because of that. It's because they have this sort of street level thing that everybody is able to enjoy AC/DC. You know, I mean, like I said,
Yeah.
go to a hockey game and watch everybody pounding their feet when
Yeah.
TNT comes on or when Thunderstruck comes on. There's just sort of universal appeal to AC/DC. So.
You know, to go back to an earlier point, you know, you were talking about how big Back in Black was and how, you know, pervasive it is, sort of thing. I did a podcast episode of my History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. I don't think I did the whole episode on this, but for some reason it was part of one episode, I think. But anyways, it was this idea of AC/DC toured Back in Black throughout the 80s kind of thing, right? And I don't have my notes in front of me with stats, but bear with me. This is kind of like what this was about, sort of thing. And this might have come from a discussion with David Krebs as well. You know, he managed AC/DC during that period, and for those about to rock. But I can't remember if we ever talked about this, but the idea goes something like this, right? It's like, to the record company, one unit of record sales is one unit of record sales, right? So say you Back in Black comes out, great, it's doing fine, it's picking up, it's selling a lot of copies. You know, it's not crazy huge, it's just doing great all the time. It's like, what's going on here, right? For Those About to Rock comes out, it does amazing as well. It probably sells more than Back in Black the minute it comes out for 6 months, right? Flick of the Switch comes out, sales are not that fast, right? They're kind of going down, sort of thing. But you go on tour for Flick of the Switch. Now let's get up to, say, Fly on the Wall, right? So Fly on the Wall comes out. It's doing even slower than Flick of the Switch, kind of thing. But by this point, and even including Flick of the Switch, if you think about it, Fly on the Wall comes out. It sells like 300,000 copies out of the gate, kind of thing. So for 6 weeks, it sells more than Back in Black, right? But they go out on tour, right? They go out on tour. Flick of the Switch Fly on the Wall sales are starting to taper off. You know, they're getting down to almost nothing, but you're still on tour for that album. You're playing a few songs from it. It's still selling okay, right? But the point is that when AC/DC goes on that Fly on the Wall tour, right? With Back in Black doing these crazy numbers all the time and never stopping, sort of thing. Yeah. By this point, by the tail off of Fly on the Wall, or the tail off of Flick of the Switch, or the tail off of Blow Up Your Video, when you go out on tour, you're actually promoting Back in Black. You're selling more copies of Back in Black every single tour than you are of the current album, right? So to the record company, and you're out there, you know, and it's almost immaterial if you've knocked a few extra songs out of off of Back in Black that is in the set list, but you probably don't, right? Those songs probably stay there, and you probably never knock any of them out, and you probably even add one or two, because basically, to the record company. So the point is that, you know, deep into 1986 or 87 or 88, you're on tour, and basically, as far as the record company is concerned, your reason to be on tour is to sell more copies of Back in Black. Your current album's dead. Flick of the Switch is long dead, right? Fly on the Wall's dead. Blow Up Your Video's dead, right?
Yeah. You're
selling a few, and it's like, oh, you know, the guys have to feel creatively self-actualized that you're selling some records. But fact of the matter is, it's almost literally, you could say, starting at about 6 months after, let's say 8 months after For Those About to Rock, you're essentially on the Back in Black tour for the rest of AC/DC's career. Right?
Yeah.
What do you think of that? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I say this all the time, and I call it the Back in Black syndrome, where when you have an album that's as massive as Back in Black, it casts such a shadow that everything that comes after it is living in the shadow of that album in a lot of ways. Yeah. So people will sometimes even say, like, oh, For Those About to Rock didn't really, you know, it was sort of didn't sell as well, it was a disappointment. It still went like multi-platinum.
It's like seven-ish, seven times platinum.
It's like any other band, 7 times platinum would be like, you know, absolutely mind-blowingly incredible. Yeah. But when you're 25 times platinum or whatever it is with double diamond with Back in Black, it sort of makes everything that follows after that, it can't help but live in the shadow of that. And you almost can't get away from it. And like you said, it's one of those albums, and Malcolm has talked about this, where Back in Black didn't explode out of the gates. It took a little bit of time for that album to really get kicking. And then they re-released Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap in America, which I believe came out before For Those About to Rock. I could be, and then For Those About to Rock came out, right? So you had, and Malcolm talks about this, them touring for Back in Black. Dirty Deeds is out, re-released. They're still touring for Back in Black. For Those About to Rock comes out. It's also condensed it, like you said, in a probably a better business model. They would have waited. It's like done a Metallica Black Album thing where they tour for 2 years under one album. But they were just still cranking out records. And like you said, as Back in Black came out a little slow, and then once it started picking up momentum, it was just like this out of control, it was just selling like crazy. And then they had no choice but to, like you said, be constantly touring that album. And again, when you have an album that is that massive, there's only a handful of hard rock, let's keep it to hard rock, and heavy metal bands that sit in this rare double diamond, top of the mountain type of thing when it comes to sales. The Black Album I just mentioned, Metallica, they're in there. So when you have an album like that, it's like you can't get away from it. And you're right. I mean, you're sort of stuck touring it, like you said, through the 80s, even well into, like you said, Flick of the Switch, and then Flick of the Switch and Fly on the Wall. But by the time Flick of the Switch comes out, it's like there's almost like an AC/DC fatigue as far as like album sales. You've had Dirty Deeds, you've had For Those About to Rock. Back in Black is still getting played like mad on the radio. There were the singles from that album. Wasn't like they had 1 or 2 singles that hit for 4 months and then disappeared. I mean, that stuff just kept growing and growing and growing. It's like Boston's first album. It's like every one of those songs on Boston's first record, you hear pretty much every one of those songs in constant rotation on classic rock radio. It's the same with Back in Black, Shoot the Thrill, Back in Black, You Shook Me All Night Long, Hell's Bells, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, Have a Drink on Me. All those songs get played like crazy. So I think you're absolutely right that
it's a little bit like, this is, I guess, the same argument, but imagine, say, Geffen bought a full page ad in Rolling Stone 7 months after Slip of the Tongue came out, right? So you could buy a Slip of the Tongue ad and it causes 30,000 in sales, right? Or you could buy a Whitesnake 1987 ad and it might cost 50,000 in sales because that album is just so huge. You know what I mean? So it's a bit like that, right? It's a bit like, like I say, I mean, every year you're selling more copies of Back in Black than the current album. So you're kind of on tour for Back in Black as far as the record, because one unit is one unit sort of thing.
And I've heard people in the industry, many people say this, that the music industry is basically propped up by only a handful of albums. It's Back in Black allows them to sign all those hundreds of bands that only sell 250,000 copies, talking back when people bought records.
Exactly, yeah.
The Dark Side of the Moon and the Eagles' greatest hits and Michael Jackson's Thriller and, all these Journey greatest hits, all these just kabillion selling records. They're the ones that are they're the pillars that hold up the industry because they keep selling to this day. I tell this story all the time. It was about, I'm going to say 13, 15 years ago. I was in a Best Buy. I don't know if everybody has Best Buys, but they're like an electronics store that also used to carry CDs. I'm standing in line. There's a kid behind me with his mom. Kid couldn't have been any older than 12. He's got an AC/DC hat on and he's got the Back in Black CD in his hands. And his mom is, reluctantly, okay. I hear the mom, okay, I'll buy it for you, that type of thing. And I thought to myself, wow, look at this, man, a 12-year-old kid. I'm sure he's heard some of these songs already on the internet or whatever, but this kid is taking Back in Black home for the first time. And he's into it. He's got the hat, his mom, he twisted his mom's arm to pay the $9.99 for the CD or whatever. And I thought, wow, man, I mean, that's to be back, to be able to go back in time and experience that again, and to see younger generations of kids embrace this kind of stuff. And again, it goes back to this theme, I guess, that AC/DC just has this universal appeal, and Back in Black has moved into this, like, I don't, man, well, they'll put it in a time capsule, so 500,000 years from now, space aliens will discover this time capsule, and Back in Black will be in there, because it's just that much of a, put it in the Library of Congress type of thing. It's one of those albums. And when you got an album like that, it's, you can't, it's what everybody remembers you for. It casts a very, very big shadow.
Yeah, one other way to look at this also is, imagine Geffen deciding whether do we run an ad for the new Badlands album, or do we run an ad saying, go play Whitesnake, slide it in again, hear it again for the first, or whatever, right? So part of it is, again, you may literally cause more sales of that 1984 album than the new Badlands. But I guess, you might also you might cause Whitesnake 1987 sales or Slip of the Tongue sales, right? So yeah, it's funny like that. Well, the last thing I want to say about Back in Black is I've always thought that album cover is like the farthest away from the music possible. Imagine if they would have put a super happy, gleeful party album cover on that album, right? Something in bright oranges and reds with explosions on it or something. It's like, man, like, that is probably the most extreme example I can think of where the cover art doesn't match the music, because the music, if you really, it's hard to get that album cover out of your mind. It almost cloaks all of these songs wherever they are on the party scale, and it's mostly super high, right? Wherever they are on the party scale, it just adds a cloak of doom to every single one of them, sort of thing. And so it's like, you wonder, wow, I'm not even saying on sales, like, because I mean, obviously, it can only be less, I suppose, no matter what you do to it. But it's just the most incongruous album cover art per album that I think the best example I can think of.
Yeah, and when you think of AC/DC covers, most of their covers, there's nothing particularly dark or heavy about any of their covers. It usually comes across very kind of party-ish and, like you said, rock and roll. But yeah. All right. Well, your book is called AC/DC at 50, and you go through a bunch of major milestones. So maybe you could share with us, after doing this book, what were just a couple of the, if you had to distill it down? I mean, we mentioned Back in Black. That's obviously a huge milestone. Bond passing, Brian coming in. What are some, really big career trajectory changing milestone moments in AC/DC's history?
Well, Bond passing, forget about Brian coming in, just Bond passing is a big one, right? Such a huge news story that was at the time.
And what do you remember about that? I mean, you were into them at the time. I always love asking people this. How did you hear about it? What were your thoughts? Because I know in one of your books you say something to the extent of, and Bond left us when we needed him the most, or something like that. You being a teenager at that time.
That was a massive party album, Highway to Hell was, but so was Back in Black. It's like, I just remember that Brian was just totally accepted right away. It was like an exciting story. I don't know, maybe at that age you don't mourn about death very much as much, right? Because it reminded me of when Ronnie James Dio came into Sabbath. It's like it was just accepted. It was like, oh, this is exciting, right? There was no backlash whatsoever. It's like, wow, got to see how this works out, right? And Brian, everybody loved Brian's voice right away. I just remember zero negativity about it, right? That was one thing. I mean, other big moments. Yeah. I mean, even the SARS stock concert was an amazingly huge moment. it was pretty darn inspiring to see the bounce back with the Razor's Edge, how big an album that was after, at least 3 that were pretty inconsequential. They weren't much of a deal at all. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it's an odd question, because you think of all along the way, they're just kind of even Steven, like you say. I mean, there's not a lot of drama. They just put out an album very rarely, and then they go on tour a little more. Even that was rare, right? And I just remember now, thinking back to that strange concert I saw, this weird Bad Vibes concert. It come to think of it, it was one of the last concerts. It was pretty close to the end of Brian not singing anymore, and his voice was not very good on that night, nor was any of the sound, right? So yeah, it's funny, Guns N' Roses. I mean, that's obviously talked about in the book as well, as a strange thing, having Axl Rose sing for AC/DC. I never liked that idea very much. I thought it was kind of weird, although Axl did an amazing job, right?
Yeah.
You know what it did? It broke with the cool tradition in that band.
Yeah.
Of getting an unknown English person into the band, right?
Yeah.
Or an unknown Australian or whatever, with Brian Johnson coming in, or let's get Malcolm's cousin into the band now. Let's get Stevie Young in, or when Cliff Williams comes in, from the band or whatever, right? So it was cool that they had this sort of like no celebrity thing, right? So it just felt weird having this massive celebrity come in to the band, right?
Yeah. I would throw in, one sort of milestone moment in their career that maybe a lot of people don't think about. And I was reading it in the excerpt in your book. When they originally released Dirty Deeds in Australia, the US record label was ready to drop them. They were not happy with it. That's why it didn't get released until after Back in Black came out. So really, Let There Be Rock was an album that sort of, if Let There Be Rock had done poorly, AC/DC could have very well been dropped from their label, at least the North American branch of their label. And that certainly would have changed the trajectory of, a lot of things with the band. So, I don't think people realize how, we look back on Dirty Deeds now, and it's like one of their biggest sellers. But at that time in their career, when that originally came out, they were on really shaky ground. It sort of reminds me of Rush with right before 2112, with Caress of Steel. The record label was kind of like, we're thinking of dropping you guys, but we'll give you one more chance, and it was sort of like that with AC/DC, like, we're thinking of dropping you guys, but okay, we'll give you, their manager talks them into giving them one more record. So I would put that as like sort of a career, sort of pivotal, almost behind the scenes milestone.
Yeah, one cool thing about that album is that everything before it, I mean, forget the Australian High Voltage, it's just not a very good album. Like that's the most uncooked that they were. But I mean, TNT, Dirty Deeds, our version of High Voltage, they're all great beloved albums. But Let There Be Rock, the big thing that they did is they had that molten, heavy, powerful guitar sound, right? It was just like this seething, crazy, electrifying, electrocuted production values. And I'm not a big Let There Be Rock guy anymore. It's like, it's for some reason along the way I got it in my head that and the production's kind of similar, but it reminds me of Volume 4. Like Volume 4 is the Sabbath album from the first 8 that I sort of crap on, quite often. Like, think it seems like sort of it seems kind of like depressing and dark and dour and uniform and smothering to me. And that's how I feel like about Let There Be Rock. But of course, like Powerage is probably my favorite AC/DC album, period.
Yeah.
And then I'd go probably Highway to Hell, and then I'd probably go Flick of the Switch.
I've always loved Let There Be Rock for its live feeling, its electricity. Yeah. I always think about, I saw an interview with Malcolm and Angus's older brother, George, who produced the band with Harry Vonda from the Easy Beats. And George talks about recording Let There Be Rock, and the interview is, what were those sessions like? And he's like, we basically just set up and we played live. And he said, we were playing Let There Be Rock, and towards the end of the song, Malcolm's amp or Angus's amps caught on fire. He goes, one of the tubes exploded and it caught on fire. And the interviewer goes, wow, that must have sucked. You almost got to the end of the song. the amp blows up, you got to start over. He goes, start over? He goes, I wasn't going to stop a shit hot recording session for something minor, like an amp catching on fire. No. So when I think of Let There Be Rock, that's what I think of, like amplifiers catching on fire and just the band, like, you know, amps blowing up, electricity, sparks flying all over the place. I mean, it's just, you know, them just going into the studio and turning their amplifiers up and just absolutely going for it. So it's always had a special place in my heart, Let There Be Rock. But okay, so this is awesome. This has been an awesome discussion, just kind of talking about AC/DC and talking about Martin's new book, AC/DC at 50. This is a super cool book. I'm really looking forward to sitting down and reading this. So make sure, check out the link down below in the description where you can go get more information on the book and where you can order the book. Get it while it's hot. This one isn't going to stay on the shelves for too long, I don't think. So Martin, thanks again for joining me here at the Lair. Got any other projects or anything else you want to mention you got coming up?
Not particularly. I mean, everything that's in print is at martinpopoff.com, and there are PayPal buttons, and I sign them and send them out from here, as you were saying. But yeah, the Dios, I'm down to my last box on either of the 2 Dio books. And yeah, the Pink Floyd, unfortunately, the whole print run's gone, so no more of that till May. They're getting another print run of that, so that was a drag. But yeah, that's about it. You know, got the audio podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, and we've got our video channel, The Contrarians.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Martin. Hopefully we'll see you again here at the Lair real soon. And for everybody out there, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.
Right.